So, welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is lawyer Phillip Millar. So, Phil is an ex vet. He's also known as the rogue lawyer, which I'm actually going to get him to explain. So, Phil, welcome to the show.
Morning, my friend.
Good morning, brother. So, you go by the rogue lawyer. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why you maybe picked that description?
Well, it gives me kind of some just some joy to know when I say it, it pisses other lawyers off, because lawyers are just so bland half the time. And probably it comes from there was a book I read when I was in some of the special units in the military called The Rogue Warrior, about a Navy SEAL who dared question the status quo, the authority, the way things were being done. So that's basically what I did when I left the military, is start kind of getting into law and questioning how law is done, so that we can be of better service to people rather than just say we're smart and charge ridiculous amounts an hour. So it gives me pleasure, and it also is part of a good branding experience that just when I represent some clients, it's clear that it's not going to be conventional warfare. It'll be asymmetric warfare in order to make sure justice is done.
So, just basically getting the job done instead of, following the status quo and just doing what most people would do. You're actually just trying to get the job done.
Yeah, I worked for Colin Powell for a little while over in NATO headquarters, and he once said to me, good leadership means pissing people off, because mediocre people don't want to be told to raise their standards. And he said, if you're not pissing people off, you're not pushing the boundaries. So, I apologize to all the people I've pissed off over the years, but they were not open to change.
Well, that's a good quote to live by, and obviously, you live your life, but by that quote. But we've known each other for a few years. Just kind of reconnected again recently, and the reason being is because I saw an article where Phil was actually representing an unvaccinated military vet. And that's the primary reason why I wanted to chat today. So, how did that come about? Was it just someone who was unvaccinated and didn't want to get the jab, and then they just contacted you, or how did the story kind of unfold?
Yeah, by way of a little bit of background, the reason why I was looking forward to coming onto your podcast is, there's a need for a discussion in where I call the alternate middle, where there are people on the fringes who are in echo chambers. And I think the COVID, it created a huge amount of troubles for our society to have good discourse. But one of the things that I respect about you is that you'll change your position, you're interested in the data, you're not on one side or the other. But lawyers and doctors during COVID, there were some that took advantage of people's very emotional positions and started advocating for a position, and they were getting lots of likes. You've seen the doctors, they post one thing, they get a million likes. There were lawyers doing it, but they weren't very effective. I was contacted by a group called the Joint Center for Constitutional Freedoms, which a guy named John started years ago as a lawyer, and he just kind of a libertarian trying to protect people's constitutional rights. And they were looking for a lawyer who was capable of representing at least 30 serving military members who are being kicked out because they wouldn't get the vaccine. Most of them had already had COVID and recovered. They were all extremely healthy. They had served on missions. They were highly qualified. And what the military did, they made a conscious decision to say, and I was able to get the document from the Trudeau government that said, we want the military, we're going to use the military to set an example for the rest of society in terms of vaccine mandates. So they came up with a very harsh rule that said, everybody will get a vaccine by November 21st of last year, or we're going to kick you out. And usually to kick somebody out of the military, it takes about 18 months. They devised a plan to get them out in 4 months. So it was almost like, if you dare defy us, we're going to supercharge you out. And I know this is a bit of a long explanation, but there are charges you could do in the military if somebody doesn't obey a lawful order, like disobey a lawful order. They could have charged them. And they actually have a specific charge called failure to take a vaccine, because let's say you're in Africa and you need to get a vaccine to stay operational. If you didn't take it, they would. But the military decided specifically that they weren't going to charge them because they didn't want the matter to be heard in a court. so you could challenge whether it was a lawful order or a necessary order. So they said, do this. And then when the service member didn't, they then started an administrative release process saying you're not fit for service anymore because you're not obeying an order. So they bypassed the criminal justice system where they could challenge it and just said, we're going to speed you out. They denied every request for exemption for medical or religious, pretty much. And so this center came to me and said, we have this Corporal Shannon Jones, she's about to be kicked out. What can you do? And we came up with a plan to apply to the federal court for an emergency injunction to bar the Canadian Forces from kicking her out until she was allowed to grieve the decision, like a redress of grievance. Because the grievance took 3 years. They're going to kick them out in 4 months, but they wouldn't be able to get the grievance heard for 3 years. And it was just fundamentally unfair. So we
gap.
Yeah, but just, yeah. Like what's somebody to do? Like, and this Shannon Jones, she's an example of a successful female who overcame all of these obstacles to become highly qualified, have a successful life and family, and then they're kicking her out. So speaking about some of the things I was doing before, I was also doing a little bit of a media campaign behind it and sending things into Ottawa, because I took personal offense that the Prime Minister would use our military for a kind of a public policy political agenda, as opposed to something that says, you know, if you or I are in the military, and I know you could have done really well in the military from what I know about you, you know, if somebody tells you to get up at 5 a.m. because we're going on an operation, like, you can't say no. But in this particular case, where they were ordering everybody to take a vaccine, not considering an exemption, not even considering that if somebody had COVID and had kind of equivalency of 2 vaccines. So at the same time, there's a warrant officer, James Toppe. You might see him in the press. He actually served with me in the infantry. He's got 6 operational tours. He was working in BC as a reservist, and they were kicking him out because he was unfit and unhealthy, the military said. And he's walked across Canada from Vancouver. He's about 7 days outside of Ottawa. So it's ironic that they said he was not healthy enough to stay in the military, but he's just walked across Canada. He's arriving and meeting a bunch of MPs next week. So I represent him because they're trying to kick him out as well. So that's a long-winded introduction. I apologize, but it meant a lot to me, this case. I got vaccinated, but I just thought it was very unfair to people who dedicated their life to serving Canada that they were being kicked out because of politics.
And it's very, very concerning, though, that Trudeau wanted to use the military as an example. You know, I mean, veterans should be treated with respect. You know, they fight for our country, they fight for our freedoms, and then, you know, he turns around and says that, you know, your reward for that is you guys have to get this vaccine. And the other thing too that, you know, you kind of mentioned a couple times is that a lot of these people are younger, they're healthy, you know, and they've already been infected with COVID. I mean, once you've been infected with COVID, and, you know, a lot of these guys are probably in the 20s, 30s, 40s, you know, they're going to be pretty low risk overall. So in terms of like not even, you know, addressing these cases, and then it sounds like they're kind of just like dismissing any, you know, medical exemptions or dismissing any, you know, religious exemptions, which is, you know, not right morally. And also too, you know, it may in fact be placing some of these people at risk. Like, some people do have legitimate vaccine reactions, and you know, telling, you know, someone in the military that, you know, if they don't get the vaccine, that they're going to lose their job. I mean, that is medical coercion. Like, you know, people say you don't have to get it. Well, you kind of do have to get it if you're dependent on your income, or if you're dependent on your job to support your family and to support yourself, you know. So, you know, I don't really buy the argument that, you know, no one's being medically coerced. I mean, if you can't work, then, you know, they're taking away your livelihood, they're taking away, you know, a big part of your life. So, you know, I do think that if you have to get it for work, that is medical coercion. You're not really given a choice whatsoever.
And in the military, it's even more intense. And I think you mentioned it. So I served 12 years in a lot of high-speed units across the world. You commit your life. Like, you usually generally move to another base, you put on a uniform, you cut your hair, you sacrifice other opportunities. You know, it's a lifelong career. And then so it's even more destructive in many ways, because like you might be posted with a family in Cold Lake or Petawawa and you get kicked out. Well, where are you going to go? It's not your hometown. But I think one of the reasons, so to finish it up, so we had this motion in front of the federal court that I was to argue next week, and we knew that people in Ottawa were getting really flustered about it, because if we won the motion, it was going to undermine the mandate. And I was making it clear that I was going to link Trudeau to this, using our military as political guinea pigs. And I was able to cross-examine a senior bureaucrat on Monday, representing the military. And I just ripped them apart. But because we had a female as the first person, you might not know, there was a report that came out a couple of weeks ago called the Arbor report that said the military had systematically treated females poorly. So the only thing that moves Trudeau is bad press on politically correct topics. So he didn't care about the military people, but I said, you make sure that the government knows that you're kicking out a female who is a success story in the military. And there was just a report from retired Supreme Court Justice Arbor that said the military has been systematically abusing and prejudicing females. And that is something that I want to ask the Prime Minister questions on. I want data on gender-based releases. I just caused a stir, not because I thought that was the best angle, but because I knew that would get in front of the Prime Minister's desk right away, because he doesn't like, that's what he responds to. And then I got a call that people were panicking up there from an insider I have up there. And then on Wednesday, they announced that they're ending the federal vaccine mandates because they wanted it done before we argued our motion on Tuesday. So fingers crossed, the military hasn't announced it yet, but if every other federal department has got rid of it, and their lawyers asked us to take to adjourn it, like I'm almost certain that we've ended the vaccine mandate for the military as a result of what we've been doing.
And as of right now, Phil, are they the only group of people in Canada who are still mandated to get the vaccine?
I think government-wise, yeah. Well, so Alberta, Ontario, and New Brunswick ended it. The federal government is ending it. I don't know if all the other provinces have, but for like CN workers, now it's removed, but the military hasn't made a position yet on it. So I think it actually made me very happy to kind of save these people's career. It meant a lot to me.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they, greatly appreciated that. And I'm sure they liked being, represented by an ex-vet, someone that they can actually trust and know that has, their best interest in mind. I was wondering though, too, if you could just comment a little bit. I really apologize. I forget the gentleman's name who's walking across from BC to
Warrant Officer James Toppe. He's got a social media handle you guys can follow. And, at the beginning, nobody would cover him. But now gradually people are starting to cover him. And the timing, I wish you could have just got in a week earlier, because his arrival would have coincided nicely. But the man walked across Canada just to kind of protest, that they were kicking him out after he's done 6 tours serving our country overseas. Like, it's ridiculous.
So he's done 6 tours. So how old is this gentleman?
I think he's in his 40s, but extremely healthy. He's had COVID, right? Like, and they were kicking him out. He was a reservist, so he had retired. So he's like a part-time military guy in British Columbia. And they're saying that you can't. But this is how ludicrous the military, and it burns my ass that the military is being used as like a tool. So get this, there's a base in London where you are, and often those guys have to go to Toronto. So, but when they drive to Toronto, whenever there's like 2 people in a car or 3 people in a car, senior officers, they all have to wear a mask for the whole trip in the car. So imagine this was like last week. So you've got like senior combat officers who have been triple vaxxed, had COVID, but every time they drive in a car, they have to all wear a mask in the car. It's embarrassing, because it kind of like undermines the strength of our military, that they're being tasked like guinea pigs to be seen in cars with their berets on and masks. It burns
Are
my
they
eye.
also the only group that has to wear a mask when they're at work? Right now, like who? And I mean, maybe you can't speak for everyone in Canada, but in the province of Ontario, and maybe you can speak for Canada. Are they the only people that have to wear a mask right now, or?
I haven't canvassed anything, but it's certainly the only one that I'm aware of. Like, but it's just there's just no common sense. But it offended me as a proud, ex-serving member that these combat people, are being forced to put masks on, because somebody up high wants to please Trudeau. Like it's killing me.
Yeah, I think what it is too is like, they know that people in the military, are very good at following orders. So they're probably sort of, targeting them, in that regard as well. And that's why, it seems like the only people right now that are that have the vaccine mandate. And, I didn't know that they had a mask mandate, in that regard as well. I mean, the only time I wear a mask now is when I go to like long-term care homes and nursing homes, which I do, about once a week or so. But other than that, I haven't been wearing a mask lately. And as far as I know, you don't need to in almost anywhere in Ontario right now. So it's kind of strange how, we're living by different rules than the people who are serving our own country.
And the military follows rules, but the one way to lose good people in your organization, especially like good military people, hate stupid rules, right? Like they understand the necessity for rules about how to get onto an aircraft, how to jump out of a plane, how to treat your weapon system. But like when you get these kind of rules that they can tell aren't part of operational effectiveness, good people leave. And so the military has a giant crisis of people leaving as well, which is something they need to address.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one thing that makes someone in the military, that who's very successful in the military is a little bit of an attitude, and where they're, a little bit independent. Like, yes, they're good at following orders, but they're also good at being independent and making, good decisions at critical times. And unfortunately, when you have people in the military who are being kicked out like that, like these, and that's what's happening, because these are people who want to make their own decisions. They want to make their decision about their own health. And generally, the way you do one thing is the way you do a lot of things. And so these people are probably very independent thinkers. They probably push ideas forward in the military, and they probably understand when something's not going right, that they should correct action. And those people are being taken out, and unfortunately they're probably going to be replaced with people who are only going to follow orders. They're not going to think critically. And when you have a bunch of people like that, things just don't get pushed forward, and they always seem to kind of stay stagnant or even recede. So, it's unfortunate that, right now it seems like in the military in Canada, they're kicking out some officers that maybe should be there, that could, push the needle, make the military a little bit better, more competitive. And, they're keeping in the people who are just obeying orders blindly, and are just, accepting being medically coerced.
It's bad, not that it's medical, but it's also Trudeau, because he rules with an iron fist over the military in Ottawa. He has a very strong politically correct kind of woke culture mentality. And as you know, I've represented many victims of sexual assault, and I love destroying people who abuse power and sexually assault people. That, like, I also like making sure people aren't wrongfully convicted of things. But we have this escalating tension in Ukraine and Russia, and then you have a political organization that's kind of removing those decision makers you just talked about. Right. And so if something was to erupt and we needed our military, it'll be a hard lesson when you send people into combat led by a woke crowd of kind of university buttercups, right? Who are going to ask, you can't ask for a safe space when Russian artillery is landing around you. Like that, a professor doesn't come in and give you a safe space to help you at that point.
Yeah, I mean, there's reasons why, Hell Week, like, that's the week that the Navy SEALs go through. For people who don't know, I think I don't know if that's the official name of it, but that's the name I hear of it.
Hell Week is part of Bud's training. I did supervise one of those with the SEALs, and it is that type of struggle that allows people to push through very difficult
Yeah, like
combat situation.
you can't make that training easier, because if you make that training easier, you're just going to get weaker soldiers, and nobody wants that. So there's certain things that we have to keep to the highest standard possible, and that's just one of the things that I think that has to be kept there. And it's unfortunate that Trudeau, and I'm glad you brought him up, because I've been pretty vocal about my basically complete distrust in Justin Trudeau for the past couple of years. But he has this kind of like woke culture, and if that gets over to the army, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? We can't have soft people in the army. We need the best officers possible, and the ones who are best trained. And I hope that he doesn't do anything into the training of the officers so that it makes it easier, because then you're just going to get weaker and softer officers who are not going to be able to defend our country and make good decisions when we need them to.
You see it in all professions, in the medical establishment, the legal establishment. Like the people who are kind of running it at the top, they just do the status quo. They want to please political masters, and they kind of suppress young new ideas. And so unfortunately right now the higher ranks of the military has been gutted, and it's being replaced by kind of political high ranking officers. But hopefully we don't get into war. Nobody ever wants to get into one, but in case of emergency, you want some people who can pull the trigger.
Yeah, it's interesting to say that too. I almost feel like in some professions, like in my profession in medicine, like I feel like almost all doctors are very much on the left-hand side, to the point where they're very, very woke, and they virtue signal a lot, and I don't know how much like critical thinking that they're actually doing. And I'm sure that you probably see that in lawyer profession as well. And I know, just coming back to my profession, that Gad Sad, I heard him say maybe about a month or so ago, he had some research indicating that I think pediatric patients, or sorry, pediatricians, infectious disease doctors, and maybe psychiatrists were all basically very, very left leaning. And during the pandemic, we've kind of leaned a lot on infectious disease doctors, because obviously COVID is an infectious disease, and then also too on psychiatrists, because as I'm sure I mean, mental health has just very much deteriorated over these past couple of years. So you have all of these physicians who are known to be very, very left leaning, and I don't know if that's something that needs to be addressed, or should at least be discussed. Yeah. Because it's basically we know that all these people are very, very left leaning, and they're making all the decisions. And sometimes I think it's good to have, like you said, someone who's alt middle, and I've kind of like used that term before myself, and I try to stay in the middle. But I think my profession, your profession, probably they've gotten too much into this woke culture, and I think that there will be consequences of that in the future.
Yeah, I subscribe to, I think it's called Hemlin's law, which says don't attribute to malice what can adequately be explained by incompetence. And in the medical community, left is a term, if you just follow the money, how do people get promoted? How do they get status? Where does the money come? It's positions in hospitals, right? Hospitals are governed by board of directors that are quite tied to political appointments. And so I think, when you talk to doctors independently, I find a lot of them are quite right, because they don't want to pay taxes and they want to have their special their things, right? But when it comes to public statements, they're just terrified to say anything contrary to the status quo, because the institutions will silence them and retard their promotion. And that's where you need people with courage, not to be not to exaggerate things, but you have to have the courage to stand up and question. Medical science, go ahead 50 years and people are going to be laughing at us like we were putting leeches on people who are bleeding to death. You know what I mean? Like, so to assume that all of the answers today is ridiculous, because 50 years from now, people are going to look back and go, I can't believe they didn't know that, or I can't believe they were treating X with Y. So that certainty that our institutions promote, I think it's very misguided.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think too, they're like, I come from the camp in medicine where, like, if say something is, I'm referring to a supplement, a drug, anything that is it's been shown to be beneficial, and there's basically no drawbacks, you should initiate that treatment. And for me, the big one that I have found through my research, I mean, there's many meta-analyses on vitamin D that indicate, again, it's not like something that is would have eradicated COVID completely, but it would have helped save, I think, a lot of people. I don't want to really put a number on that, but I do think that would have helped save a lot of people. And we know that vitamin D is effective for upper respiratory tract infections. We knew that prior to COVID, because it is good for the common cold. And it's just strange that even after 2 years, there's no one, I haven't really seen any public health officials, discuss that treatment. And so, you talked about courage. And I think that, we do need to have courage in order to speak up about, things that are being done to us. But there's also, kind of this like, sin of omission too, as Jordan Peterson calls it, where like, that something is right, yet you're not saying it. And like, that's why I've spoken up so much about vitamin D, is because, I really, really believe that this is something that could have made a difference in the pandemic. And it's, benign. I mean, you should be taking vitamin D anyway to, prevent osteoporosis. It's been linked to, depression and to low testosterone. So, there's reasons you should be taking this anyway. And, I just can't believe that, no one in the public health, Justin Trudeau, Doug Ford, nobody, they didn't say anything about our immune system and taking care of ourselves during this
losing
time.
some weight. Don't be fat.
Exactly.
Like, it's so political. Like, I think of it like a lot of these kind of liberals are like all for these mandates and shutdowns, but they have giant backyards where their kids can play. They have tons of toys. They can go on vacation. But if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of money in an urban center and you're in an apartment with a single parent, and and they shut down the basketball courts for young people, like like the damage that was done that will never be counted is far reaching in our society. But because politics has evolved, people are virtue signaling. Like, my military thinking, I think, was similar to Jocko Willnick's, is shut down early and fast, assess the situation, identify high-risk people, and then preserve society. Because when you shut, the most vulnerable people, as were like people over 80 with other conditions and metabolic disease. So if you shut down the whole society, they're shut down. But if you just shut down them, their life isn't different. It's just that it seems unfair, right? But if you would have just like kind of shut down that, we could have gone on, worked towards it, and we would have stopped all of the other cases. But instead, politics comes in line, and a First Nations man who's 20 years old got a vaccine before a 57-year-old with type 2 diabetes under the Canadian, like, how can you take that and put political correctness onto how to mitigate damages for your society? It blows my mind.
Yeah, no, you kind of just said something that I kind of had like almost a light bulb moment then, where like, what I'm kind of understanding is that instead of doing what's logical and what's best and what would be best for Canadians and their health, what they're doing is they're just trying to make things fair for everybody. And by making things, fair for everybody, they've really, destroyed a lot of lives. And I can see how, if we, said that only this demographic should, get the jab, this demographic has to do something differently, or maybe only gets, one jab, whatever it is, then that would be seen as unfair and not like an equal society. Whereas if they actually just, did things based upon the science and, tried to preserve society, like you said, and focused on the people who are at high risk, then that would, look bad and would look unfair, which is, ridiculous. What you want to do is you want to do the most logical thing possible. And if some people, are going to have, more rights, or are going to be, you're going to be mandated while some people aren't, well, that's just the way that it is. That's not fair. That's just making the best logical decisions with the best science.
But it's actually just ridiculously stupid that they think that they can offset the injustices done to First Nation communities by giving them priority in the vaccine lineup. Like, this is the type of wokeness that's killing me. Like, I see some law firms that put on their SIG blocks, we acknowledge that we're occupying, Ojibwa territory. Well, rather than put that in your sig block, why don't you just give them some fucking money? You know, like like if you're on their land, pay them rent. But you're putting it on the sig block, and it just becomes this circle of virtue signaling that is undermining the effectiveness of our society. And I think in the medical community, it must be frustrating for you, because you're supposed to do the logical scientific method. And so when you see that your industry is getting corrupted by political agendas, it would be very frustrating for me.
Yeah, it's I mean, hydroxychloroquine kind of turned out to be a bit of a bust overall. But the thing is that at the beginning of it, people hated that drug just because Donald Trump was kind of the first person to discuss it, and he said that it's a medicine that might be able to save a lot of people from COVID or whatever he actually said at that time. And then people kind of jumped all over it, and just because he said that, people said that the medicine didn't work. Now, like I just said a minute ago, there's been a lot of randomized controlled trials on it now, and it doesn't seem like it does work. But people are actually, basically just saying that I'm not going to take this drug because someone who, doesn't have the same political views as me thinks that this drug is effective. I mean, that is absolutely batshit insane. But that's a lot of people's mentality right now. Like medicine has been politicized.
And Trump, is no different than Trudeau in that he used the issues for his own benefit. So he politicized them himself, right? He was speaking. So, our leaders are just using this from a political perspective. I didn't feel like I ever got an interesting piece of information from Trump on the vaccine, right? Like the guy, but somewhere in the middle, somebody should say, hey, we can call the virus the Wuhan virus because it came from China. We have the Spanish flu. We can be logical. But again, they were trying to politically correct how you name a virus, where we've always named viruses from where they originated. But all of a sudden we couldn't call it. It became a giant issue. It's just what we do. It's the Spanish flu. Anyhow.
Yeah, I remember when he said, I guess he called it the Chinese virus for a bit. A lot of people were really upset. And I mean, I understand it a little bit, but yes, if you look at history, that's just what we do. I don't think we're gonna rename the Spanish flu. If we try to rename that now, I think people are gonna laugh. It's not gonna work out. But that's very, very odd that a lot of people were really, really
that's their big issue.
Yeah.
But it just shows how conventional knowledge changes, because they said it couldn't have come from a lab. Now it might can. So you always need to be free to challenge what the authorities are saying without being just ridiculed right away. But I think you've done a good part.
And that's the thank you so much for saying it. And that's the thing in my profession right now, is that we're not allowed to have an online discussion and a dialogue and say, what do you think is working, what do you think is not working. We're basically just supposed to say whatever the government is doing right now is working, and I'm going to push this agenda only. And obviously,
and what's irrelevant, sorry to interrupt you, but it just dawned on me too. It's almost like doctors are being used as pawns, like the military was, because the doctors are supposed to speak about the truth of science and risk and all that. But once they're employed by the government then can take a doctor and say, you will go say this. And people believe they're supposed to be impartial scientists, but they're actually just saying what the government is telling them to say. So they're being used as pawns of policy, like the military was.
Yeah, I think, we have been as well, and I think that there's an agenda that's kind of being set forth that, doctors should be, very, very left leaning, and they also should, basically follow everything that the government guidelines say medically, even though they have their own medical training and their own medical background, and they should be able to, at least have a discussion about this, have some kind of dialogue. But it seems like if you have any idea at all or any kind of opinion that's against the mainstream narrative as a physician, you're not supposed to say it. And I think that the way that we kind of push things forward and get the best ideas out there is by having lots of discussions with lots of different opinions, and then figuring out which one is best and which would work best. And again, right now we're just pushing one narrative only, and physicians aren't allowed to question the narrative or push any other ideas forward. We're just supposed to go along with what we're supposed to say, which is whatever the government indicates.
I think it's changing a little bit. Like, I think the average person is not really buying into it, but the media chambers and certain people who can influence policies are, but I think you see a tide changing. Like the removal of the federal vaccine mandate, is a big step. I think finally we're going to take masks off in planes.
That'd be great.
I think people are just, the general people are fed up with the nonsense, and I love it now, because as soon as I see somebody wearing a mask and I know they don't have an immune vulnerability, I can easily put them in a category that makes sure I never speak to them for my whole life.
I mean, there's people I saw yesterday. Like I was driving around, and there was there's people still outside wearing a mask, like by themselves.
Like, and it's like, put me in an asylum. Like, that's what it screams to me.
Yeah, like I mean, I can only, like, I try to sympathize with them and be them empathetic, but like all I can think is like, man, that person must have just a ton of anxiety. I really wish that they could just be a little bit more free, but they're so afraid, I guess, of not looking to the world like they're doing the right thing, that they just comply. Nobody wants to look like they're not doing the right thing. So you have people that try to get like a Ukraine flag, something that tells you that they're vaccinated, and they want a picture of themselves with a mask on, all in their profile picture. I see that
reminds
all the
me
time.
of, did you see that movie? I can't remember it, but it was an old kind of comedy movie where the guy was wearing like 3 polo shirts.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, he had 3 polo shirts on. It's like you wear 3 masks to be like more masky.
Yeah, exactly. It's like people who are like, double mask. We're almost making fun of the people who are single mask. And then, we also too had like, people who are boosted or double boosted. We're kind of, shitting on people who are maybe only single boosted or double vaccinated. It's crazy. So it's just like people always trying to level up in like the virtue signaling world. And
I think you should do a TikTok on that, Mike. You could do it. You could do a good TikTok on leveling up your virtue signaling, right?
Yeah,
one mask is not enough. Like,
yeah, I think that'd be a great TikTok, actually, because the masking is again, like, it's been lifted, and it's been discussed that like it does not that we don't need to wear them in most situations right now, and yet people still continue to wear them, and people are just used to complying now. Like, they're just used to complying. And I think that the people who are still wearing masks all the time now, like, they'll comply with anything, and it's a scary thought, but like that's the way I kind of see things going, is that people are just gonna they want to show to other people how compliant like they can be, like all out compliant you is basically what's going on.
And we're moving into kind of a historical political segment, and I studied it in the past, the Weimar Republic, which was the 1930s before Nazi Germany came in. But the way you say compliant, it's interesting, because if you start organizing your society where you reward compliance, so all these people are trying to be more compliant, and that allows them to move up the organization faster. So it's like, it's insidious, because if you start to create a society that rewards compliance rather than challenging authority, you set the stage that everybody in your institutions have risen up because they demonstrated compliance. And then at the same time, what happened in Germany is the left and the right kind of circled almost their extremes to a connection point where they both became equally ridiculous and ludicrous. And then that set the conditions for authoritarian governments. And it's almost like we're moving there. I'm not trying to be alarmist, but when I think about it, it seems like we're kind of moving towards something like that.
Yeah, no, I feel like a lot of people are like, they're like, I meet people now and they're happy to identify themselves as an extreme left, or like I'm lefter than left, or like I'm a radical left. you know, and like that, unfortunately, like, you know, almost seems to be maybe even the majority of people now. I mean, there, like you said, there are some people now who are, you know, seeing kind of through the bullshit and seeing that, you know, people really are just doing this for virtue signaling reasons. They're not actually, you know, trying to help anybody. But it is, you know, a very, very scary thought. And then, yeah, I mean, like you said, like, you know, you do have people on the extreme right, you know, as well, and they're, you know, just as guilty of doing, you know, awful things. But, you know, where there's, seems like there's not much consensus for the middle, you know, just directly right in the middle. And, you know, it kind of reminds me too of, you know, this like PPC party that came out, you know, this year, you know, Maxime Bernier, and, you know, that was what was born because, you know, there was no one in that who's supposed to be on a little bit on the right or centered in the Conservative Party who's acting like they were centered, and because of that, that was kind of, you know, born, I think, that party. But now, you know, I do think that, you know, Pierre Poilievre, hopefully he gets in, is more of a centered politician who could maybe bring us back to the middle. But unfortunately, you know, Trudeau and Singh, you know, they're very, very, very much on the left. And what we need is someone who's more centered. And I think that we do have, you know, a good candidate right now. And hopefully, you know, that happens.
I like Pierre, but from a political perspective, like O'Toole was a military guy, but he wasn't a strong military guy. He was a logistics guy.
Okay.
The difference in I think in Canadian politics is the elections are won by the middle 20%. So if you take the middle 20% of society, if you can get 70% of the middle 20% to buy into your things, you win. The thing with liberal advisors, and I know them, is they're not liberal or conservative. They're apolitical. They're just political killers. They don't care about politics. They will just destroy it. And the weakness in the Conservative Party is that they're surrounded by a lot of people who think the same way. So they'll all sit in a circle jerk and talk about we love Alberta oil, but they won't address why not sharing Canada's resources with Quebec results in the loss of 7 ridings, which means that you can't, you know, and so, you know, I've been trying to get through to Pierre saying, look, get some people in your circle that aren't just reaffirming that you're so right. Like, and that's what happens in the Conservative Party often. And when I was talking to BJ Dichter, the guy who did the trucker convoy, because I wanted to support the working class people who were challenging a mandate. And he acknowledged that they lost because they wanted to only promote from within. And what I had told him is that as soon as the money started pouring in, you should have gone to the top liberal political strategists and bought them, right? And they have no loyalty. They would have come right over, but they would have been able to defeat what happened over the course of a couple of weeks because they're just too good. And if you only want to like hang around with your friends who tell you you're smart, you're not going to win the big battle. So you know, our issue, I think, to get Trudeau out is to have a platform from the Conservative Party that appeals to the 20% in the middle, which is like, let's lower inflation, let's get housing prices done. But I love chatting with you, and it'd be nice if we could create a party that was like involves, you know, Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, Joe Rogan, Gad Saad, Douglas Murray, people who like are comfortable crossing political boundaries and labels to get to the answer. But it's, you know, what does that party come under? It doesn't have the machinery to win.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the issue right now too, is that, you know, when you do kind of form a new political party, you know, everyone kind of has the idea that, okay, well, if I vote for them, I'm sort of just like wasting my vote, you know. And I think, you know, that's why, I mean, to my knowledge anyway, there's never been we've never had a federal leader who wasn't part of the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party, to my knowledge. So, you know, because of that, people basically vote for one of those two parties all the time, which really strengthens your point that really you're just looking for that 20% people in the middle, right? Because people more or less, you know, are going to vote for one of those two parties. You know, traditionally that's what, you know, been when that's what's happened in Canada. So if you can just get that 20% in the middle to swing to your side, you're probably going to win, or you're going to give yourself a real good chance anyway.
O'Toole would have won if he wouldn't have had clown advisors that told him a couple of weeks before the election to say he supports assault weapons. Whether or not you you want to make a logical argument, that just took the people in the middle away from the Conservative Party. And you didn't have to say it because everybody who supports assault weapons is going to vote for you anyhow. Like it
Yeah.
was just, so I hope things change, and I hope we can keep having good discussions about important topics.
And too, I know that we want to chat a little bit about the transportation and in Canada with regards to lifting the mandates and stuff. So they've just been lifted, I guess. Well, they're not officially lifted because it's not June 20th yet, but they will be lifted on the 20th. And did you think that prior to this that the mandate should have been lifted much sooner? And what was your like why did you think that they did leave the mandates in place in the first place for so long when you look at other countries that had lifted them much sooner?
I think it's the arrogance of power is just that they're just in their little bubble congratulating themselves for being more virtuous, right? And that Trudeau and his policy people didn't understand that, like, if there's somebody who, I thought it was crazy that you restricted ability of some citizens to travel because they didn't get that vaccine. Like, I like vaccines. I know you support the vaccines at the right time. But
Absolutely.
once we understood that they weren't that effective on transmissibility, but were effective at negative outcomes, then that policy should have changed the next day. Like, but we had people who couldn't visit their relatives or fly. It was so punitive, but they just don't count in the political game because it's not a big enough, right? So what we should have been doing if I was on one side was messaging to the middle, because they pay attention if they sense the middle is switching. But there was nobody really seemed to care. But I just think it's, and then you're probably aware of it, but the studies into plane travel and the results of people who could be contact traced of having gotten COVID from plane travel is so small.
Yeah, it's almost
crazy.
impossible.
No, and so it goes to the mass too. I was talking to some doctors yesterday at Calgary Hospital here, because in England they don't use masks a lot of the time, even in hospitals. But what I take from that lesson learned is that the HEPA filters, the great filtration systems they put on the planes, were very, very effective at taking. So why not from this lesson say, okay, one way we can reduce infections in operating rooms and restaurants is have way better airflow and filtration systems, because on those planes they have the best filtration systems in the around now. That would be a lesson I would learn. Nobody got it on a plane, even though they're traveling. It's because air circulation and filters are better than masks. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, I've heard that argument made very, very little, and I think that people should have been discussing that a lot more, because I mean, if you can basically eliminate masks and get a filtration system that's actually better, that's going to reduce more transmission and infection. I mean, why would you not go ahead and do that? And that would be a great learning lesson, because there could be another I hope there's not, but there could be a variant or something that comes out that does cause a bit of commotion and causes a rise in infections again. And that would just be a very effective tool for keeping society relatively open and normal, while still being able to reduce transmission and infection.
Yeah, for sure.
So hopefully that's something that people take into consideration in the future when these things come up. And in terms of other clients, Phil, like, have you had anyone that had a valid religious or medical exemption that wanted you to represent them, and because their employer was mandating an exemption or anything like that?
Yeah. Before I answer that point, I know you've worked in mental health, but the one thing, I've had probably hundreds of people come to me who had vaccine concerns, and when I look back at it, the first people who came to me, I kind of dismissed them and just said, get the vaccine, right? Because the info wasn't available to me, but they were getting kicked out of school or losing their job, and I was like, okay, but I just kind of said, do an assessment, like, if you lose a $250,000 job, how is that going to affect your health and life, as opposed to the risk of taking a vaccine you don't agree with? Like, there's some, it's almost kind of like you're paying an unnecessary tax. But what I saw is that for some reason, and this is the context that your listeners might enjoy without being disparaging to some of my old buddies. when we were deploying to Africa, let's say years ago, the soldiers surrounding me were very rural, Christian, kind of conservative people. But when we were like, you're going to get to go to Africa and blow up people legally, they sprinted to get every vaccine that was on the table, right? They're throwing methylquin in them, like all of these experimental or toxic drugs for Ebola. I can't even remember all the names of all of them, right? But they literally sprinted to get them because they got to go over and get a medal and blow stuff up. In today's world, something happened politically that this vaccine that really, is in all likelihood not as dangerous as half of the things we took back then. They've anchored to it, and they're willing to kind of die on that hill when really the risk to them, there is a risk, but there's a risk of driving on the 401, right? And there's a risk to being obese. There's a risk to drinking. And it's hurting their mental health because they're now identifying as it, and then society has kind of punished them. And I was trying to tell them, you don't have to identify that strongly to it, such that it kind of puts you into depression. And I think it's really put a lot of people into depression. And that would be something I'd like to explore, is how we, there are things that it's a hill worth dying on. I'm not sure that was for some people, but the convictions, the strength of the convictions of some people, like I have a university prof from Western that we're starting a lawsuit against Western because they mandated a week before September of last year that every professor had to get the vaccine. But some of them were working remotely, right? And some of them were doing stuff like computer science or something that's easy to do remotely. And then all of a sudden, without any warning, if you didn't get it in 7 days, you're going on leave without pay. But interestingly enough, they kept some profs who they couldn't replace. So there was also this kind of Machiavellian decision that if you were young, but you had skill sets that we couldn't replace, they just ignored you. But if you are an older, expensive, tenured professor, and I believe they're actually, some universities are using it as a way to kick out tenured professors. And so, this guy ends up getting fired, loses his pension, and everything. So that was a mandate decision that I think resulted in a wrongful dismissal. So we're going to be suing them for that. And, there's a bunch of other cases.
Sued. That's awful. Yeah. I mean, that is pretty Machiavellian. And I mean, that's, that's like targeted, malevolent strategy to like, take out the guy who you have to pay a lot of money for, and then to, leave the person that you absolutely have to have in there. And then you're going to, treat them differently. It's like, we're going to mandate you, but because we really need you, we're not going to mandate you. I mean, that's awful. And I mean, it's something that's, completely morally wrong. And so I'm glad that you brought that to my attention today. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the universities have gone nuts. Like Calgary University, after Alberta lifted the mandate early for masks, the university kept it, even though their population was the lowest at risk. And then the law school, every year new graduates try to meet employers. So they do a law fair, similar in medical world. And I was going to go and help them out until I realized that even though there was no mask mandate in Alberta, the law school insisted that it all be done by Zoom. So you have new graduates trying to meet lawyers to get jobs, and the university imposed upon itself that it would be by Zoom. Everybody would have to get on Zoom and then try to invite people into rooms. And I was like, screw you, you guys are fucking nuts. Like, I'm not participating in this. You're hurting your students who need to meet people. I've lost a lot of faith in decision-making in universities.
Yeah, I think that the universities, I mean, they have been for, I think, a decade or more now, just gotten, way to the left and have really bought into this kind of like woke culture, so to speak. And, it's definitely going to have, devastating consequences in the future. So, it's really disappointing that, they've kind of leaned that way. But, like you said, those people are like the lower risk people. And I think even in some universities, they've mandated boosters as well, in some in the States. So, I mean, these, some of these kids are literally like 18 years old and they can't go to university. But like you said too, though, like there are going to be some very, very detrimental effects. Like, when you meet someone in person versus meeting someone over Zoom, it's different. It's very, very different. I mean, sure, you can still get a good experience, you can still have a good conversation like we are today, but meeting someone in person is differently. And especially when you're trying to get a job and trying to
Yeah.
move up in life, you want to make sure that you can work with the person next to you in the same room physically, and you're not going to be able to have that experiment if you're only doing these Zoom meetings. So I feel for those lawyers who have had to go through that over the past year or two.
And also, you want to know the people. Like, if, let's say, we were at the career conference, they were walking around with a mask. Well, that's a big sign to me that I'm not hiring you, because you have a huge anxiety. Like,
Yeah.
take your virtue signaling to some government organization, but in our business, where you're fighting for people's lives, like you need people who are tough and resilient.
And you want people that are going to focus on the work,
Yeah,
you want people that are going to focus on the work and do the work. And I've been reading a lot of Stephen Pressfield lately, and that's the kind of people that you need, though, people who are going to focus on actually doing the work, actually helping patients, or actually helping clients that need good representation. That's what we need in this world. We don't need people who are because virtue signaling, it doesn't do anything to help people. Like, putting a mask on in your profile picture doesn't help anybody. Like, it doesn't help anyone, so you need people actually doing real work out there.
No, they're not being heroes. Like, at some point, we should talk about the tragedy that I think happened in London recently. I'm sure you heard of Trooper Mark Wilson.
I have, I don't know the whole story, but
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so he was killed in Afghanistan in 2006, and just a couple of weeks ago, somebody came forward saying in 2004, when they were both starting in the military, he kissed her without permission in an elevator when they were drinking, and they were both married. And he pled guilty to simple assault because she didn't want to testify. Got a $1,500 fine. Then he went on to serve in Afghanistan and was killed in action. Started a charity event that raised $500,000 for shelters and hospitals, named a park after him. His mom is a Memorial Cross winner. And then last week, this woman said, hey, for 14 years, I've been triggered by seeing his name on these things, and called for it to be removed. And city council just voted 14-1. The family asked me to help them. Just voted 14-1 to remove his name from parks, streets, and cancel his charity event, even though he can't speak from the grave to say the circumstances. But isn't a hero somebody who can make good from a bad situation? Like, our society has changed. No, the people who are heroes are the people who put a mask on their Instagram. Like, there's no sacrifice. That's what we think is a hero now, is this virtue signaling, as opposed to people who may have made a mistake, turned it around. Like, can you make a mistake when you're young, cure cancer, and then is your Nobel Peace Prize canceled? Like, we're not talking about. It's so troubling where we're going, and the lack of courage in our political leaders.
I agree. And I hate to do this, Phil, but we are out of time. But it's been a wonderful conversation. And, I'd love to have you back on the show and talk to you a little bit more, just because, I know we kind of chat a little bit or a lot about vaccines today and the mandates, but, I think there's a lot more information, a lot more interesting discussions that we can have together. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can learn more about your law practice, where they can find more about Phil Millar, and where they can find you online?
I think my hashtag on Instagram is the Rogue Lawyer, but Millars Law is fairly findable now across Canada, because we have offices in Alberta, in Ontario.
Maybe spell that out too, just because of the
MILL. I got an A there instead of an E, so it's MILLARSLAW.com, and you can see a lot of our cases and our videos, and we look forward to helping shake things up and make a difference in people's lives. And I'd communicate with you anytime, my friend.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your service. Thanks for helping out, all those unvaccinated vets. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Phil. And we'll definitely do it sometime again soon.
See you, brother.
Okay. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for listening.